I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. David Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, my colleagues across the House will be delighted to know that as we've rattled through the business today, we get to make a 4-hour speech. So I welcome interventions and anyone else who would like to make a speech. But Madam Deputy Speaker, it genuinely is a delight to lead my first adjournment debate, and especially to do so focusing on rural areas. And the title we have is Access to Public Services in Rural Areas. And speaking as a rural Labour MP and being very proud to be so, it's especially good for me to be able to talk on this subject. I've actually given myself the subtitle, The Case for the Countryside. And so feel free to take that for anyone who wants to make an intervention. Now, the key point, Madam Deputy Speaker, in this debate is that we as a country need to better value the people, the landscapes and the produce of our countryside a great deal more than we currently do. For too long, successive governments have not recognised the crucial role of rural communities to our national flourishing. Up to 10 million people live in rural areas across the country, like Northumberland, and our natural landscapes and quiet places form a deep and enduring part of Britain's imagination. Rural areas often possess enduring community, but they also risk becoming museums full of interesting artefacts for visitors, but lifeless and neglected underneath, something I'm sure none of us in this chamber want. It's vital, therefore, that rural communities can be vibrant and full of life going forward. So in this speech, I want to outline the domino effect by which a range of below-average rural public services, especially poor public transport, underperforming education, inaccessible healthcare and low connectivity, interact and overlap to drag rural areas down, including in North Northumberland. But I also want to remind this place that rural Britain is a deep and integral part of our nation. As the frantic pace of life in our big cities has increased, so has our ability to extract, consume and bottle the virtues of rurality, whilst rural regions struggle at times to see the benefit in return. Every time we eat a meal, switch the lights on, turn the radiator up or take a trip to the countryside, we're benefiting from rural areas doing the hard work of producing and delivering, often out of view. So I have to ask if our increasingly urban nation is committed to the flourishing of our rural areas in return, because the quality of our public services that we receive sometimes in rural areas suggests it is not. According to the Rural Services Network, those in predominantly rural areas pay 20% more in council tax than those in predominantly urban areas, yet it's urban areas where government funding spending power is 41% higher. Now, I'm not trying to set up some kind of dichotomy between rural and urban areas or a competition, but I just think we simply have to acknowledge that sometimes our rural areas are missing out when it comes to public services. And that does impact the practical delivery of services. In the northern part of my constituency in North Northumberland, the nearest accident emergency is an hour and a half away. Many children heading out of constituency for secondary school spend 2 hours a day travelling to and from school. The village of Pegswood, with 3,000 people, sees a doctor for just a half day a week. I wonder how rural Britain can nurture a nation's tradition, history and community, as well as producing the goods so desperately needed by urban areas, when its basic public services can be below the basic standard. Any conversation about rural public services begins and ends with transport. Transport authorities spend 4.6 times less per head on bus services compared to urban authorities, yet those living in rural small settlements travel a third greater distance than their urban counterparts. Absolutely, I'd be delighted to.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for giving way on that point, and I congratulate him on bringing this important topic to the House. And as a fellow MP that covers part of Northumberland, we know all too well the impact we have seen on public services in recent years. Does he agree with me? A recent casework subject which a constituent got in touch with me about was a mum in New Hartley. She was sharing how the unreliability and inconsistency of the local bus service means that he is so often late for school. Does he agree with me that it is unacceptable for children to miss out on their education as a consequence of poor public services being delivered in rural areas?
Absolutely, and I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. I couldn't agree more, and I'm going to come on to talk about bus services, but it's especially challenging in counties like our own in Northumberland, and I certainly find that with regard to students in my constituency struggling to get to school. Getting around areas like North Northumberland without a car is extremely difficult, and North Northumberland residents are right to be sceptical of local bus services, considering that Arriva, the primary bus service in my area, is owned by an American equity investment fund based in Miami. Make of that what you will. From 2017 to 2022, the distance travelled by bus services in Northumberland fell by over a third, the highest reduction of any authority in the North East. The confused status also of cross-border buses make a bad situation worse, with many around Berwick crossing the Scottish-English border multiple times a week and having to own multiple bus passes or buy new tickets to change, and the elderly can't use their free bus pass on both sides of the border. Recently, I was made aware of a constituent's teenage daughter who undertook an apprenticeship across the border in July. She lives in Berwick and was catching a bus to and from work. However, just a few weeks later, border buses removed the morning bus. This young woman is now relying on taxis to get her to her apprenticeship in the morning. This is costing her family, who are not in a position to afford this, £150 a week. Emma endured a difficult time at school but was thriving in her apprenticeship, yet this is now at risk. Emma's not a real name, incidentally. What we need in rural areas is a publicly controlled bus system run for public service, not private profit, with an emphasis on accessibility, affordability and simplicity. And as luck would have it, this is exactly what this government is aiming for, and this is just the thing that Kim McGuinness, the Labour Metro Mayor for the North East, is also seeking to introduce. She's capped bus fares at £2.50 for over 18s, started the process of bringing bus routes back into public control, and wants to invest in an integrated public transport system that gets people where they need to go. No one expects rural Britain to have the same level of public transport as central London, but a reliable network would boost confidence, improve work and school opportunities and boost struggling communities. I'd be delighted to, yes.
Second useful contribution he's made to our affairs in the afternoon. 2 points that I wonder if he might take on board in the considerations that he's offering us. The first is the public funding formula need to be sensitive to the particularities of rural areas like Lincolnshire and his constituency too. And at the moment they're not. Local government funding formulas and police funding formulas, for example, are skewed towards urban areas. The second is, pertinent to his point about transport, we need to re-dignify small towns and rural places by making sure that the footprint of government in those places is felt. Over my time here, we've closed magistrate courts, we've removed tax offices, driving test centres have been centralised, cottage hospitals have reduced in number. When you take the dignity out of rural places, you oblige people to travel much further to access what they need, and you change the character of those communities.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. On the 2 points, absolutely. I'll just quickly respond. Absolutely, and I know the local government minister is looking at the formula for how grants are made to local authorities in rural areas, and I welcome that. And I absolutely also agree that fundamentally, this is what I'm trying to say, there should not be a penalty to living in the countryside in a rural area. It's not an indulgence. It's vital to the future of our country, and so we need public services in rural areas. But I'm happy to give away to the honourable lady.
thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way and also for the comments from the Honourable Gentleman there. We know that it costs more to deliver services in rural areas, yet rural councils are set to receive 41% less central government funding than urban councils in the provision of local government finance settlement coming up. So does the Honourable Member agree with me that we must ensure that that settlement formula considers rural deprivation alongside clustered deprivation to ensure that those rural areas receive the services that they deserve?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and you would expect me to say that I, as a Member of Parliament for a rural area, that I think it's absolutely essential that we consider the peculiar circumstances, the geography, the logistics, the long-term challenges, the rural deprivation which really does exist when we're considering our grants to local authority areas and rural areas. I'll move on and talk just a little bit about education, which is another one of the 4 things that I want to discuss. And assuming that they can get to school, having just talked about transport, we then need to ensure that children are able to go to a good school that sets up their future and energises the local community. But in rural areas, when the school provision suffers, so does the whole town or village, because there is no business or transport link more significant than the nearby secondary school. In the town of Berwick, in my constituency, it's extremely reliant on its one secondary school for the nurturing of the necessary skills and qualifications for the town's economy. So when the school struggles, the town struggles. It's a 2017 report, but I think it still stands. It said that Berwick is one of Northumberland's most deprived towns. It's a vulnerable economy characterised by poor quality job opportunities, part-time working, low wages and very limited education facilities. Now, Berwick doesn't just need a better school, it needs a school that is able to generate a revival in a beautiful but isolated town that has no A&E, no major employer and minimal further education. Right now, Berwick deserves and has the opportunity to build a new world-class educational campus on that secondary school site that combines learning with further education, vocational study, SEN provision, local enterprise and primary healthcare. And that makes the very slow progress of the Conservative Northumberland County Council plan to rebuild Berwick Academy very frustrating for students, parents and the whole community. And the further education point is an important one because while up to GCSE level North Northumberland students keep pace with their national peers, at A levels and higher education they begin to struggle because further education opportunities are few and difficult to access. One constituent in Berwick told me about their son who wants to be on a sports course in Newcastle that would set him up to go to university. The council are able to provide basic transport but will only do so to a course in the closer town of Ashington, and which would not provide him with the qualifications for university. So instead, his family are paying £15 a day for his transport to get the educational opportunities he needs, an unsustainable amount for basic provision. I'd be delighted to.
Thank you, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that the record settlement given to Scotland by this government should be spent by the Scottish Government on vital infrastructure such as schools and transport for constituencies such as mine in Hamilton and Clyde Valley, who feel sadly neglected over 18 years of SNP government, none of whom, unfortunately, are here today for this debate.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I don't know whether you should declare an interest as a Scotsman or not, even though I'm a Member of Parliament for an English constituency, and proud to be so. But absolutely, you know, I've seen that with my own eyes, and I agree that the record settlement that the government has given, the SNP government in Edinburgh, should be well used to provide, especially for those rural areas, but also for the whole of Scotland. So I thank her for that intervention. Sticking with education, but looking more into special educational needs, there are 588 children on an ECHP in North Northumberland, and many of them with more severe special educational needs are facing a 100-mile round trip to access adequate education. There are not enough specialist schools nearby, nor enough specialist places at mainstream schools to support their learning. And that's why I welcome the government's £1 billion increase in special educational needs funding this year, and look forward to ensuring that rural areas receive their fair share of that additional funding, but it's excellent to see. Rural areas get held back by a lack of educational opportunities. They need help from a broad coalition of local residents, businesses, council and government to develop outstanding solutions that can become engines for opportunity. I'd be delighted to.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank you, my honourable friend, for his powerful speech, and I contend that people in the west of Northumberland also share his frustration at the neglect and contempt they seem to be held in by the Conservative administration at County Hall. Does he agree with me? I'm delighted that he speaks at the point on provision of SEN transport. Does he agree with me that when we come at our surgeries to speak to constituents who are devastated by the challenges they face getting their child into an appropriate educational environment, that is one of the ways that we must judge our local government, it's one of the ways that we must judge the provision of those opportunities, and ultimately it's one of the opportunities that residents of Northumberland have not only to judge the Conservatives on come the local elections.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to wholeheartedly associate myself with the comments from my honourable friend from a neighbouring constituency. I was in the village of Chatham, which is near the border of our two constituencies, on last Friday, speaking with a group who are focused on the issue of autism and special educational needs. And there was just palpable frustration in that room with about 30 parents and carers who are simply unable to get the support that they need from the County Council, despite this additional funding. And so it's something I believe that he and I can work on together. I'll just move on to third or fourth points, which is about healthcare. Until schools improve and until transport becomes more reliable, healthcare professionals are not going to move to rural areas. For Berwick to have an accident and emergency and for North Northumberland to have genuinely local primary care, we need to incentivise doctors and nurses to move with their families into our neighbourhoods. Until they do so, rural healthcare will continue to suffer. 25% of rural residents are aged 65 or over. In North Northumberland, the average age is 54. But rural councils receive 14% less grant funding for social care services and 58% less for public health. Dental care provision is also extremely sparse. Estimates are that a 1,500 square kilometre region of North Northumberland has no NHS dentist. Imagine living alone in Woodcock or Rothbury, miles from the nearest NHS dentist, and your tooth starts to twinge. And on that point, I'm happy to give way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. On the point of healthcare provision in rural areas, does he agree with me that there is a desperate need to review the core contracts for GPs so that we better incentivise GPs to set up in rural areas? And would he also agree with me that in areas where it's clear that there will be a ongoing need for a GP surgery, that there is a role for ICBs to perhaps manage that estate so that it can be secure over a long period of time?
Thank the Honourable Gentleman for that intervention. Yes, I think we need to do everything in our power to encourage healthcare professionals, including GPs, to move into rural areas where they can have a fantastic quality of life. I think there's a role for the ICBs. I like to see, I'm pleased to see that the Northumbria Healthcare Trust in my part of the world, 25% of GP surgeries are actually working directly part of the trust. So I think we should look at any option that can draw in additional healthcare resource and especially people into rural areas. We need to rethink how we do rural care and primary care. In Orkney, for instance, I'm reliably told that doctors practice in rotating shifts, 1 week on, 8 off, and pursue other work. It's certainly an unusual solution, but to provide rural residents with quality of care, we may need to think and work creatively together. I welcome the Government's work and funding to incentivise GPs to see more patients and more of the same patients, and the promise to introduce 700,000 more urgent dental appointments. Which leads me to the last of the 4 points I'd like to make. Finally, any discussion of rural areas must also... I would be delighted to, for the Honourable Gentleman.
Be generous, and thank you for giving me a second bite of the cherry. I know he's moving to his exciting peroration. So on this issue of GPs, I mean, GPs seem less and less keen to meet people face to face, still less keen to visit people in their homes, as they once did routinely, by the way, in my lifetime. So would he agree with me that the centralisation of services rather than the distribution, which seems to be the order of the day over successive governments on the grounds of rationalisation, is particularly bad for rural areas and particularly bad for least advantaged people.
I do agree with the honourable gentleman, and I think that it may be utopian to imagine the family doctor who doing home visits, but I would like to think that we should always be aiming for what's the ideal, and that there are, as we've said, there are particular challenges in rural areas in attracting and retaining GPs. So digital connectivity is the last point I want to make. Any discussion of rural areas must also include the ultra-rural. It can be hard to believe, but there are thousands of homes across this country that do not receive mobile coverage, gas from the mains, or even electricity. If we split the country into urban and rural, there's this other category, ultra-rural, and many of these ultra-rural areas would be in my constituency in North Northumberland. I think of settlements like Elsdon and Thropton, tiny villages in my constituency, and perhaps as isolated as it's possible to be in modern England. Perhaps 12,000 properties in North Northumberland are not connected to the gas grid, instead relying on a mix of alternative fuels. And a handful of properties don't even receive electricity. This year, residents in the Upper Coquet Valley are being connected to their electricity grid for the first time, thanks to the Ministry of Defence. Prior to that, 2 neighbours could not simultaneously put the kettle on without both houses being plunged into blackout. I remain hopeful and excited about the promised potential of Great British Energy in this respect for these ultra-rural communities, and look forward to finding out more detail about how hyper-local, hyper-rural communities can benefit from the renewables that will come about from Great British Energy. On top of this, BT estimate that 1,000 premises in North Northumberland won't benefit from commercial investment in gigabit-capable coverage broadband. They're simply too hard to reach. It's a similar story when it comes to mobile networks. I'm sure I can hear my constituents groaning listening to this. So you drive up and down the constituency and the mobile network coming and going. Ultra-rural settlements can't take advantage of the digital age because they can barely get online. I'm thankful for the government's commitment to the shared rural network and to developing ways of supporting Project Gigabit so that ultra-rural communities benefit from these upgrades. Otherwise, we risk turning into 2 divided nations. I could go on. I'm sure you'd be delighted if I do. Thank you. I thank the honourable member. But I hope a few points have become clear throughout my remarks. I'd be delighted to, yeah.
I'm really pleased to see the honourable gentleman in his place as special envoy, of course, but also pleased to see him in his first adjournment debate, I understand, and wish him well. He's taking the time up greatly, and well done. You have lots of time. You've already told me you can do it to 7 o'clock if Madam Deputy Speaker doesn't take exception to that, of course. But just say this: one of the things that in my community, in my countryside, in my constituency that I live in, is the issue of mental health. I'm not sure if the honourable gentleman has had a chance to mention it. I know the honourable lady in front of me always speaks about farmers, living alone, independence, and the pressures of life. Never more in all my life, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I remember the pressures of life as being intense. Does he have the similar problems in his constituency as I have in mine?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. And yes, sadly, I do, in my constituency of Northumberland, absolutely have these same challenges with mental ill health. In the farming community, absolutely, but also in the rural community, which is often comes about from isolation. People living generation after generation in rural communities are proud and they're resourceful. Sometimes we perhaps don't reach out for help, and I would simply encourage them to reach out for help. It's always a good thing to reach out for help if you're struggling, but I thank him for raising that important point.
Well, my honourable friend, good point.
Absolutely, delighted.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's giving an excellent speech, and he and I sit at opposite ends of our region, but I think our rural communities across the region share very similar challenges. He's spoken about mental health, and there's another issue that I'd like to comment on, which is the problem of addiction and substance abuse in our rural communities. This is a real issue in my communities, in my constituency, and there are some really positive community-led initiatives that my local councillors have been involved in Broughton in particular, peer-led scheme called Recovery Connections in the local village hall. So I wonder if my honourable friend will join me in commending this work and agree with me that it's important that we tackle this issue of substance abuse in rural communities.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. I'm so pleased that he made it. Declare an interest before I became a member of this place. I was Chief Executive of Homelessness Charity and was delighted to work with Recovery Connections, a great organisation doing great work. And absolutely, you know, as much as we've talked about mental health challenges in rural areas, we also have challenges with drugs and addiction. And it's not the preserve of urban areas, but we have our own challenges and we need support as a result of that. So I thank him for that intervention. So the points that I'd really just like to try and summarise here. Firstly, rural areas provide so much for the flourishing of the nation as a whole, but I suspect, in fact I'm saying, they're not receiving enough back in, especially in terms of public services, which is the title for this debate. Public services overlap and create a network effect to either energise or hinder the flourishing of rural areas. Bad public transport means less educational access, which dampens the desire of healthcare professionals to move in and to treat our sick. This is not an issue that is easily fixed or accounted for in a simple spending algorithm, but we do need to address it. That brings me to my next point, which is to say that to raise the quality of public services in our rural areas will require a combined approach across government. The Country Land and Business Association may have a point when they say that ministers and officials across departments assume DEFRA has sole responsibility for the rural economy. I'm pleased to see my right honourable friend in his place. DEFRA doesn't have the economic levers at its disposal to unlock the potential of the countryside by itself. It has an important role, but it can't do it itself. That power lies in other departments and increasingly local authorities. And what I'm saying is we need a cross-government approach to rural public services. And I appreciate the Minister being here today. Rural areas are not simply urban areas with less houses. They can't be approached and handled with the same calculations as in our cities because they are serving our country in different ways, whether preserving land, investing in local communities, producing our food, reminding of our past, generating our energy, or offering a vision of the good life. But to do all of this, rural residents need to know that their children can hop on the bus to a good school, and a local one at that, that sets them up for their future. That they can access primary and urgent health care when they need it. That they can phone family and friends without fear of a power cut, or hop in an electric car charged by the mains to visit them. And to know that their nation values them and their way of living and is determined to see them thrive. I'm encouraged by all that the government is doing, has done to serve rural areas, and I encourage it and everyone in this place to ensure that rural Britain plays as key a role as it can be in establishing our future as it has our past. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Dave Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank my honourable friend for securing this debate on a really important subject. My constituency, Lichfield, Burntwood and the villages surrounding them, like people right across the country, know just how hard it can be to be able to access basic public services in rural areas. And the reason I rise today is to talk about an incident that actually happened on Monday, which has already had a significant amount of national press. It was mentioned by the Minister in wind-ups yesterday. In the early morning hours of Monday morning, there was an enormous pile of rubbish fly-tipped at the top of Watery Lane leading out of Lichfield. That's a countryside lane. There are around 9 residential properties on it. When I popped up there, when I heard about it, I popped up to have a look, and it was a genuinely staggering amount of waste that was up there. It was cuboid, it was maybe 20 feet wide, 15 feet high, and probably at least 40 foot long. This was not a few tyres out the back of a transit van. This was industrial scale, enormous fly tip, which meant that the lane was completely unpassable from the north. Unfortunately for residents living on Watery Lane, the southern end of that road has been closed for a housing development for a few months. So there was a time period there where there was no access to the public services. And when we talk about public services, there can be nothing more basic than the fire service, ambulances and police to be able to get to an emergency should it appear. I'd like to really thank Red Row Homes, because they were, as soon as they were made aware, they put a member of their staff up on the top of the lane at the road closure who could keep the service road, the road that runs past it, clear, make sure that we weren't going to have accidents of people crashing because people were trying to get down the road and couldn't. They also opened up their compound and their site so that the emergency services could access those properties should they be needed. In the event they weren't, but that's more by luck than anything else, and I'm very glad that should they have been needed, Redrow were able to step in and do that. The company also offered to help the council clean up when it came, and I think in terms of asking for builders to be considerate to their communities, that's a great example of actually someone, an organisation stepping up. But I think it's very important that we raise this issue in this place. This was a really serious example of industrialised rural crime. This was a very serious setup. It must have been an articulated vehicle of some type because of the sheer size of what was there. Some of the residents have estimated there may be 200 tonnes of rubbish, which has today been cleared by the district council, who've been working very hard to do so. But those 9 households, although there was a way to get in and get out to work, they were actually faced that morning with not being able to go about their business. They couldn't get to school, they couldn't get to work, and obviously the difficulties around that. It also led to a massive issue for the countryside centre, which is just off Watery Lane. Now, there are around 20 businesses based there, including, and I'll declare an interest here, my old man's art studio is up there now. He's not a commercial exercise, but there are a number of businesses which operate out of there: a butcher, a gin distillery, a cafe, bakery, and a host of others, including Cockahoo Creative, who run Lichfield's Foods Festival. Now, all of those businesses lost 2 days of trade because of this rural crime. So I think when we talk about the provision of public services in rural areas, it's not always just about the availability of hospitals, the availability of doctors, the distances from A to B, or the availability of bus services. As important as all those issues are, it's also really important that we see a police service and a response to issues like these that are attuned to the issues of rural areas. Because in that situation, that fly tip was much more serious because of the nature of where it happened. So I think, sorry, I'm not even following that. I think the real reason why I rise to my feet is in that instance and in other instances of these serious fly tips that happen right around the country, I think it's really important that we have the framework that the police and the services need to prosecute these individuals. In the case of what we saw in Lichfield this week, we need to see an investigation. And it seems like there may be some clues and there may be some stuff in that tip which may lead to some resolution to an investigation, but that investigation has to end not only with significant fines, but we really do need to start considering custodial sentences for people like this, because of the actions of those individuals, there was a genuine risk to life there. Because actually, if an ambulance couldn't get to a heart attack, that is a genuine risk of life. And this is something which affects rural areas much more significantly than urban areas, and why I thought it was very important to raise this as part of this excellent debate. So I thank again the member for securing the debate, and your leave, Madam Deputy Speaker, to contribute. Thank you very much.
Adam Jogee.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm very pleased to be able to follow my friend from Lichfield, a very good Staffordshire man, and he and I do lots of work together, so I enjoyed seeing him cast the iPad away and speak from his heart, which he did very well indeed. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to you for calling me to say just a few words, you'll be reassured to know. Firstly, I want to pay tribute and thank my honourable friend, the member for North Northumberland. He made an excellent speech, thoughtful, comprehensive, authoritative and engaging, and I think spoke to and gave voice to his passion for his constituency and for our rural communities up and down our United Kingdom. And we all in this House talk, Madam Deputy Speaker, about being honourable friends. The member for North Northumberland and I are actually friends, which is great, and we have a mutual friend who I'm thinking of right now who'll be enjoying the fact that I've contributed to his excellent debate this afternoon. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, like my honourable friend, I'm very proud, and like many actually honourable friends on this side of the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very proud to represent a number of rural communities in God's own constituency of Newcastle-under-Lyme. I think of Audley, Madeley, Betley, Bolterley, Rhinehill, just to name a few, and on access to good quality, affordable and reliable transport, on tackling flooding, which in Madeley is a particular challenge, on school finances, and I'm going to Ravensmead and a number of other schools to talk about some of the pressures that our schools are facing shortly, on NHS pressures, as was touched on by my honourable friend from Lichfield, and our ambulances being able to get to incidences in need, and on our rural community generally. Newcastle-under-Lyme is indeed on the front line, Madam Deputy Speaker. And last Thursday evening I had the great pleasure of and fortune of attending a meeting of the Orderly Parish Council, and I'm grateful to all members of the Parish Council for the work that they do. They work very hard indeed to champion their neighbours, the needs of our community, and do very well at holding me to account, Madam Deputy Speaker, as well as the leadership, sometimes questionable leadership of Newcastle-Lyme District Borough Council. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, a clear theme of that meeting was the contempt, and I use that word consciously, that they are treated with by the Conservative Party leadership of the District Borough Council, and I think of planning as just one example of that particularly. But alongside the District Borough Council, which is led by the Conservative Party, Madam Deputy Speaker, and shows the contempt to which I referred, I think of the Missing in Action Staffordshire County Council, which is, unsurprisingly, and once again, run, as my friend from Lichfield will note, by the Conservative Party. And thank goodness, Madam Deputy Speaker, as we think about the access to services in rural communities like mine in Newcastle-under-Lyme that we want to see improved and made better, thank goodness we have the chance to vote them out in May, and I look forward to voting Labour in May and electing good Labour county councillors in Newcastle-under-Lyme. And, Madam Speaker, not just waiting till May, of course, but in our town centre in Newcastle-under-Lyme, the good people have a chance tomorrow to express their frustration, both with the lack of services, effective services in our rural communities, but particularly in our town centre in the town by-election. And the Labour candidate, Sheila Casey-Hume, is a brilliant person. She has campaigned for a very long time, passionately hard-working, on Wally's Quarry, which the Minister has heard me make representations to him in a previous life when I was in the Shadow DEFRA team, but subsequently in my role as the Member of Parliament for Newcastle-under-Lyme. And so I wish Sheila well in the election tomorrow, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I'm sure you do too. Now, as my and all colleagues in the House, as my friend noted, well, I suspect there was no confirmation sought or provided, Madam Deputy Speaker. I note that. Anyway, our rural communities were, as the Honourable Member for Northumberland noted, and remain at the heart of our country, our economy, our society, culture, heritage and the arts. And they deserve to be championed by this government and, may I say, all layers of government too. And we heard from my friend from Northumberland just what His Majesty's new government is doing to ensure that our rural communities get the support that they need. And I will gently suggest to the Minister, and he knows me well, that we will be holding him and his colleagues in the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs to account to ensure that we do just that. So with that in mind, Madam Deputy Speaker, I wonder if the Minister would accept my urging to ensure that the rural communities of Newcastle-under-Lyme and Staffordshire more generally are at the top of his agenda as he carries out his important duties in the months and years ahead, many years ahead, I hope. I would also like to echo the point that my friend from Lichfield noted, which I thought and think is bang on, and that is to note the cross-party nature of the approach required from government to make sure that we deliver for our rural communities. And I know it was a point that the member for Northumberland noted too. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, our farmers, by nature of their job, their vocation, their passion and their commitment, are at the heart of our rural communities, and they feed us. In some cases, they clothe us with sheep's wool and the rest, Madam Deputy Speaker, and they play an important role in keeping our life going. And so I would urge the Minister to ensure that we advance the Buy British and Eat British agenda, both of this government and many members on this House, on this side of the House, because that's one tangible way we can not only help our farmers, but also ensure that our rural communities get and the good, functioning, reliable public services that they deserve. And some clarity on the Buy British, Eat British agenda would be welcome as the Minister winds up this important debate for my friend from Northumberland. And Madam Deputy Speaker, as I conclude my remarks, you'll be reassured to know I would like to invite the Minister to accept an invitation I think I may have gently put to him perhaps less formally than raising it on the floor of the House this afternoon, but to invite him to come to Newcastle-under-Lyme, Madam Deputy Speaker, to see and understand the challenges facing the rural communities in my wonderful constituency. He'd be very welcome. There are a number of excellent places we can have a cold drink. I think of many pubs in our rural communities. There's tea shops, there's places for cake. The Betley Tea Rooms is an excellent, it's a lived working farm, but it is an excellent tea room. The NFU have a satellite office there, so we'll be able to kill two birds, Madam Deputy Speaker, with one stone. So we can have cake, we can see the farm, we can understand the challenges. In fact, I think about it, the then Shadow Secretary of State, the now Secretary of State, came to that farm, had some cake and tea, and was able to have a tour. The only thing I will note, Madam Deputy Speaker, is when the now Secretary of State came, he forgot his wellies. So I urge the Minister to make sure he has the appropriate footwear when he accepts my invitation to come and see us in Newcastle-under-Lyme. But as I say, there are a number of pubs. I think of the Swan in Betley, I think of the Hand and Trumpet, Madam Deputy Speaker, in Rhine Hill. You'd be very welcome to come and visit us there any time. I'll get the first round in, because I will take anybody who is interested in seeing the wonders of North Staffordshire, the wonders of our local economy, and all that we have to offer, exemplified by our rural areas, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, I am grateful to my honourable friend from Northumberland for securing this debate. He gave, as I said earlier on, an important speech, one that had us both listening and, I think, inspired, both by his commitment, I mean it seriously, by his commitment to his community, but also the wider commitment of His Majesty's Government to delivering for our rural communities. I look forward to working with him and with colleagues, and there are a number of Labour colleagues, Madam Deputy Speaker, who now represent rural communities, and we are, I know, working together to get things done. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm looking forward to delivering for the people of Newcastle-under-Lyme, working to help support the people of Northumberland, but most importantly, looking forward to working with colleagues to deliver for rural communities up and down our United Kingdom.
Before I call the next speaker, I think it's just important to clarify that whilst a huge supporter of women stand for election, I haven't actually endorsed Sheila's candidature. Sean Woodcock.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful for my honourable friend from Northumberland for bringing forward this debate. He gave a really long speech of considerable depth, and so I'm not going to repeat that, purely because I don't want to repeat any of the things that he said, because he has gone in such detail. But I'm really grateful for this debate because I think it's a really important chance to reset the narrative that has gone around over recent months about our rural areas. It has been suggested that our rural areas are suddenly in crisis because of things over recent months. Let's be very clear. Our rural areas are in crisis because of 14 years of underinvestment in them and because of betrayal over post-Brexit deals that undercut our farmers and made their lives much more difficult than it was previously. And I think that needs to be put on the record. In many ways, our rural areas are suffering because they are too robust, too resourceful, as my honourable friend says, and too innovative in the sense that that has meant that they've not be seen to suffer as much as maybe other parts of the country have. And I'll just give a couple of examples from my own community, my own constituency. House prices are an issue there as they are across much of the rest of the country. One village in particular, Hook Norton, had a severe issue of people working in the local shops, even local artists and people really valued by the community, having to leave because they could not afford to stay there. Not content to allow that to continue, they set up a community land trust. They invested capital into purchasing land, building the properties, and last year they opened 12 affordable homes in the village in order to cater to the local communities, all of which have their own power generation scheme on site and covered in solar panels. A brilliant example of innovation and looking after your community in the face of challenges from placed on you by elsewhere. The village of Middle Barton in my constituency, which had seen its buses cut by the previously Conservative-run County Council because of decisions also made by the party opposite when they were in government in Westminster, took it upon themselves to set up their own bus company, manned by volunteers, granted, but last year, not long after I was elected, I had the privilege of opening and seeing their two brand new buses serving their community in order to ensure that people there are not stranded. And those buses are, by the way, are electric. So they're thoroughly in keeping with our climate agenda. Of course.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend is making an excellent point about rural bus services in Oxfordshire. My seat of Reading, in Reading Central, has a boundary with Oxfordshire, and we notice in our area that the complete withdrawal of services by Oxfordshire County Council was a terrible mistake. Luckily, Reading buses serve some of the neighbouring parts of Oxfordshire which are near to Reading as a council-run company, villages like Sonning Common. But I do have enormous sympathy for his residents in the northern part of the county. Just wanted to offer my thoughts and support for these local companies, which are obviously doing a very good job.
Sean Woodcock.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his intervention. Further example I wanted to give is the village of Charnbury, which has an installation called South Hill Solar Farm, which is a community-owned solar farm providing energy to 1,200 residents, and it is incredibly popular. It's an incredibly well-run scheme. It's in an area of outstanding natural beauty, but absolutely everybody there loves it. And the reasons I mention it are because I think this government's ambitions are not contrary to the ambitions of those in rural areas. They are this government's ambitions rely on delivering in rural areas, whether it's on housing justice, whether it's on improving public health, or above all on our main focus on delivering growth. But they are held back, as my honourable friend has said, they're almost facing a double whammy of poor connectivity, both in terms of transport, we've already touched upon buses, but connectivity in terms of access to broadband and decent communication services as well. So my plea to the Minister in my final remarks would be that he make very clear to his cabinet colleagues and emphasise that people in rural areas do not want anything different to what those in the urban seats that may previously have been seen as the Labour heartland want. What people in rural areas is exactly the same: access to good health services, access to good education, good jobs, good affordable housing, and opportunity that everybody else has. Thank you very much.
Chris Bloore.
I quite often don't know how to follow the member for Newcastle-under-Lyme and his thorough remarks, but I also want to put on record my congratulations to the member for Northumberland. I know from knowing him for a short space of time how dedicated he is to his rural constituency and how passionately he feels about raising these issues, so congratulations on securing this debate. And whilst I was listening to his 4 points and the interventions, I just wanted to raise the issue that I'm very fortunate. The Boundary Commission have changed my constituency of Redditch many times, but they've not actually changed the name to actually encompass the many villages that actually make up my constituency now, of Ashwood Bank, of Inkborough, of Harvington and Norton. And whilst most people think of Redditch as a very urban area with some significant deprivation and economic challenges, we often forget about the challenges and the deprivation that are found in the rural areas of my constituency. You know, the old adage of don't go knock on those doors, they're wealthy in those areas, they have no problems. Well, some of the biggest challenges I have in my casework folder come from those rural areas where there are no transport links, where there are no access to dental or healthcare, where you have some of the most significant challenges on truancy, on transport links. And so I think this debate has been an excellent way to focus in on the issues facing rural communities. But I would just ask the Minister, and the government moves forward, let's make sure that we take on those challenges in those areas that are deemed affluent, that actually have some of the biggest social and economic challenges that we have in many of our constituencies.
Minister Daniel Zeichner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I start by congratulating my honourable friend from Northumberland. I understand it's his first adjournment debate. I tell him not always can they run for so long, but what a brilliant debate we've had. And also how splendidly, Madam Deputy Speaker, he made the case for the countryside, which has been echoed in the excellent speeches from my colleagues. And let me just respond briefly to some of them before I turn to the main body of the points made by my honourable friend, the member for Northumberland. The incident in Lichfield, I won't go into details because I suspect there may be a criminal case coming from it, I hope. But I think my honourable friend described it as, it wasn't just fly tipping, a serious example of industrialised rural crime. And the grief that has caused to local residents and local businesses should absolutely be put on record. And I have my absolute sympathy with him and his constituents. My honourable friend from Newcastle-under-Lyme characteristically and elegantly name-checked, I think, many of his local businesses, many of his local beauty spots, hostelries, and also mentioned parish councils, which I think are an extremely important level of local governance, which we need to work closely with. And I can assure him that when it comes to supporting buying British, this government is absolutely in line with his wishes and the wishes of the country. Turning to my honourable friend from Banbury, who raised a series of really important points around community initiatives. Community land trusts, always important for promoting housing. Very much liked his points about rural transport. I'll say a little bit more about that later in my speech. And also the community solar initiatives. It shows just what can be done in rural areas with that kind of leadership and passion. And my honourable friend from Redditch, absolutely right to make the point that the aspirations of people in rural areas, there's a 19% productivity gap in terms of economy, but what an opportunity for us and for people in rural areas to show just how important we can be. And his point on transport, again, I'll pick up in a moment. But can I start by saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government's absolutely committed to improving the quality of life for everyone living and working in rural areas so that we can make a real impact on their everyday lives and realise that potential I've just made reference to. And as the Minister in the department with the job title as Minister for Rural Affairs, it's my job to make sure that these issues are at the very heart of policy making. And members have made the point that it is a structural government challenge to make sure that rural issues are absolutely taken up. But I'm so delighted that we've got so many passionate voices on these benches that that will make my job easier. Very happy to give way.
It's for rural
Freddie
areas.
Van Mierlo.
National trails run through much of the countryside and provide a vital access to the countryside for people coming out of urban areas and also people living in rural areas. Yet the amount of money they've received to fund National Trails UK hasn't risen since 2012. It stands at just £1.7 million a year. Would he commit to looking at that again and seeing what we can do to help out our friends at National Trails UK?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable member for trying to lure me into an unfunded spending commitment, but I can assure him that we don't do that on this side of the House. But he makes an important point, and of course I will look at it. But Madam Deputy Speaker, the government has wasted no time getting to work to pursue a whole range of issues which affect both urban and rural. The Growth Mission, series of planning reforms to get Britain building, removing the de facto ban on onshore wind, establishing the National Wealth Fund, announcing a pensions review to unlock growth, boost investment, deliver savings for pensioners, launching Skills England, announcing a white paper on getting Britain working, and taking the first steps to create Great British Energy. All of these providing opportunities for people in rural areas. And all sectors can shape and will benefit from wider policy reform through the Growth Mission, which will create the conditions for businesses to invest and employ and for consumers to spend with confidence. But we've absolutely recognised the specific challenges and opportunities. I will.
Angus MacDonald.
Thank you much, Madam Speaker. I wonder if the Minister would bear in mind in your work the importance of community benefits from renewables. The whole of the Highlands is covered in turbines. They are built overseas. They're very often owned overseas. We have the highest level of fuel poverty in Britain, and indeed rural Britain. And it is really the only chance for rural Britain to level up financially that we will see in our lifetimes. And I greatly fear that that opportunity is going to pass us by.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful for the intervention, but I don't share his pessimism. I think there are real opportunities, but it's up to us to make sure that they are realised, and he makes an important point. But what I was about to say was the government absolutely recognises that there are specific challenges and opportunities that make rural communities and economies distinctive. And we acknowledge the importance of the need for direct support through programmes such as the Rural England Prosperity Fund, which does provide targeted support to rural businesses and communities. And we also recognise that community-owned businesses play a particularly important role in rural areas, providing opportunities for communities to come together and access services. But we do recognise there are significant challenges facing rural community businesses, and that government has a role to play in overcoming them. Now, alongside that, and we've heard a number of honourable friends talking about this, rural transport is, of course, key to those living and working in rural communities. And we know that a prosperous rural economy requires improvements in rural transport and, of course, digital infrastructure. The availability of affordable housing is key, as is affordable energy and access to a healthy and skilled workforce. So it's a complex mix that is required to get that growth that we so want to see. We also recognise, of course, the need for rural residents to travel further to access work, education and training, and other essential services such as healthcare raises additional challenges. We know it can be more costly, more time consuming, and we recognise those frustrations. And I was struck by the points made by my honourable friend from Northumberland about what happens when services are withdrawn. We know all too well the problems that creates for our constituents. So this government is determined to deliver better bus services. We've set out a plan to achieve that in our bus services bill, and that will give local leaders the tools they need to ensure bus services reflect the needs of the communities they serve. Now, my honourable friend was also right, absolutely, to raise the digital access questions, and particularly those in ultra-rural areas. And digitisation is absolutely the heart of this government's agenda. And we're committed to ensuring that rural communities and businesses aren't left behind or disadvantaged. So through the shared rural network, which has helped to deliver 4G mobile coverage to 95% of the UK a year ahead of target, we'll continue to deliver 4G connectivity to places where there is either limited or no coverage at all. But we are aware that there are still rural parts of the UK that lag behind when it comes to mobile coverage, and we'll continue to work with the industry to deliver new coverage via the shared rural network to these communities, enabling them to thrive. And our ambition is to go further and for all populated areas to have higher quality standalone 5G access by 2030. Project Gigabit is the government's programme to deliver gigabit-capable broadband to UK premises, many of them situated in rural communities that are not included in suppliers' commercial plans. I will.
Freddie Van Mierle.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Member for giving way, and thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Some villages, including Ewelme in my constituency, signed up to the previous voucher scheme successfully, but then were excluded from Project Gigabit because of that point. But that project was failed to be delivered on, and that meant that they were left with no internet at all, or no fast broadband. Will he commit to looking at that specific village of Ewelme and see what he can do to include it in Project Gigabit?
Minister.
I'll certainly ask my officials to be in touch so that we can get him an answer on that, because it's a very specific question. Sadly, Madam Speaker, at the moment only 85% of UK premises can now at the moment access gigabit-capable broadband. Our goal is for nationwide gigabit coverage by 2030, ensuring that at least 99% of UK premises can access a gigabit-capable connection. Turning to rural housing, access to genuinely affordable homes is, of course, essential to sustaining vibrant rural communities. And the housing shortage, I'm afraid, drives high rents and leaves some of the most vulnerable without access to a safe and secure home. So we will reform planning laws so we can build the homes our rural communities desperately need, while ensuring we protect our green spaces and the natural environment. And as part of this, the government recently ran a consultation to reform the National Planning Policy Framework. And we will carefully consider how best to build more homes and introduce a wider set of growth-focused interventions that will help us build those homes in the places that people want to live in, but very importantly, supported by the right infrastructure and services.
I thank the Minister for giving way. The hamlet of Aysdalegate in my constituency has no access to safe running water. This risk was identified in 2013, but now, 12 years later, it still remains. The Drinking Water Inspectorate carried out an inspection in 2023, and they described the situation. They said, water from a stream is captured in a makeshift pool lined with tarpaulin and then piped to a rudimentary tank with ill-fitting handmade lids. Does the Minister agree with me This is not a situation that anyone should be living in the 21st century. It's typical of the inertia we saw under the previous government, that over a decade nothing was done. And I note that there's not a single Conservative MP in this place to listen to this debate today. And will the Minister commit to doing something about it, working with me and the Parish Council who represent that hamlet? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and can I say let us speak outside this debate about that particular case, because I'm not qualified at the moment to comment on it, but let's speak further. Turning, Madam Deputy Speaker, to rising energy costs, these also pose a challenge to rural communities and businesses, and I'm all too aware that fuel poverty rates are higher in rural communities, and of course we have many homes that are off-grid. Now, my party's manifesto was clear. We're determined to lower bills, boost energy security and protect our environment by setting up Great British Energy. And GB Energy will also support local and combined authorities and community energy groups to roll out small and medium-scale renewable energy projects with the goal of increasing local generation across the whole country by up to 8 gigawatts of capacity by 2030. I will.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for giving way. In my constituency, there's an excellent small renewable scheme, and I wish to raise that with the Minister and perhaps point out the need for further similar schemes elsewhere. This is a low-head hydro scheme on the River Thames in the village of Caversham, where several hundred houses benefit from cheaper electricity. Sorry, several hundred users benefit from cheaper electricity. However, there were significant obstacles in setting up this scheme, and would I be able to perhaps meet him to explain the issues with this? There are many, many other weirs along the River Thames, most of which aren't used for this type of scheme, yet almost all of them are potentially suitable sites for this type of wonderful renewable energy, which offers residents in rural areas a cheaper form of energy.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his intervention. Of course, we meet frequently, but I very happily meet to hear more about what sounds like an excellent initiative. May I turn now to another point raised by the mover of the debate this evening, which was the importance of education and skills. And it's absolutely essential, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we ensure sustainable improvements in skills in rural areas. And to do that, we're planning to expand our childcare and early years system, drive up standards, modernise the school curriculum, but we will also boost rural and agricultural skills by reforming the apprenticeship levy into a growth and skills levy, giving businesses the freedom and flexibility to upskill their workforce. We'll also be opening new specialist technical excellence colleges to give rural communities the chance to fit skills to the needs of their local economies and empower rural businesses to play a bigger role in the skills revolution. Now, my honourable friend also raised, again rightly, the issues around rural health and the challenges there. I will.
Sam Rushworth.
Thank you. Primary schools in my constituency in rural areas have come to me that one of the challenges that they face, we have a falling population, particularly in rural areas because of a falling number of jobs. But where they have fixed costs and variable costs, they just lose funding per pupil. And what that means is that some of them are just becoming unviable to still function as schools. So would he agree with me that we need a different funding settlement for schools in rural areas?
Daniel Zeichner.
Again, I thank my honourable friend. Again, he's tempting me into trying to rewrite the Education Department's policies. But what I will say, and I recognise exactly the problem that he makes reference to, and what I'm pleased about is the presumption against the closure of maintained rural schools. But absolutely, he points to a very important challenge. And I think, as we all know, the survival of local schools is key to many local communities. So I have sympathy with what he says. Let me just turn to health, though, and that was raised by a number of colleagues. And in passing, make the point that we are very, very, very aware of the mental health challenges that are faced in rural areas, and colleagues and I have discussed this on a number of occasions, and within the department we've recently established a new group to look specifically at these issues, because we know how important the challenge is. But we also, colleagues talked about GPs and dentistry, absolutely right, and I think in the run-up to last year's general election it was one of the issues that was consistently coming up from rural communities and is a key challenge, because we know that the time people are most likely to need care they're living in areas where they're quite often too far from those facilities, and it's a challenge we're very mindful of. Now, the integrated care systems will have a role in designing those services, but they will need to work closely with clinicians and local communities at neighbourhood level. And we are making available significant new funding for local government in 2025-26, which we think will help with some of these things. Turning to that wider set of issues, £1.3 billion of new funding within the local government financial settlement, including £600 million to support the most deprived areas, including in shire districts, through the new recovery grant. In addition to £233 million in additional funding for homelessness services. Now, there is a guarantee within this that no local authority sees a reduction in their core spending power in 25-26 after taking account of any increase in council tax levels. And we believe that will provide the protections required for all authorities, including district councils, to sustain their services between years. Taking into account both money allocated to councils through the settlement and the extended producer responsibility guarantee, every planning and social care council will have more to spend on services in 25-26 than in 24-25. And for almost all authorities, we expect this to be an increase in real terms. And we're also providing a flat cash funding floor after council tax increases, which means that every council will receive at least as much in core spending power next year as they did this year, if not more. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government recognises the importance of providing accessible, high-quality services across rural communities and will continue to do everything in our power to ensure that they are delivered effectively.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.